When George Floyd died, allegedly murdered by a white police officer in May, Americans poured onto the streets in pain and anger. There was something so terrible about the way his life ended. Those last moments on camera seared into memory. The days and weeks that followed, filled with tributes, tears, prayers, and protests. From Minneapolis, where he was killed, to Hollywood, New York, Philadelphia, and beyond. With tragedy came opportunity for the socialist resistance on the left. A moment for their own Marxist revolution. And they were ready. The funding network and trained anarchist cells in place. From the start, graffiti and signs at every protest carried Antifa's messages and symbols.
Kill yourself!
And their chants filled the air.
All cops are bastards!
Defense!
Police!
Defense!
Police!
That's a fucking cop!
Leaders who called out professional agitators brought in from out of state to ratchet up the violence were ignored, like the chief of police in New York.
Get those groups out of here from California, from all over this country, who are being paid to take this movement, which is a good movement, and turn it into violence against the men and women who love the communities.
TV cop!
Months later, riots had all but consumed the protests. Federal agents were now stormtroopers. All cops supposedly bastards. And George Floyd too often missing from the narrative. The streets of anarchy in Portland burned the longest, setting fire to the nights. Antifa agitators in black leading the way. Their radical far-left agenda suddenly center stage. Their hate and violent tactics were exposed in shocking attacks like this one.
Get that nigga! Get that nigga!
Black Lives Matter and Antifa together. The first victim, a protester they'd turned on who tried to run.
Get that nigga!
Then, when this trans woman tried to intervene,
No, don't fucking play with me, bitch.
they turned on her.
I just want my backpack back!
And this African-American man who stepped in and was abused for defending white people.
What we on, nigga? Nigga, we out here for Black Lives Matter, nigga. Fuck these white hunks, nigga.
But this man, Adam Hayner, who also stepped in to try to help,
She's trying to cover her.
became the focus.
Bro, chill the fuck out!
When he tried to leave, eyewitnesses said he was punched through the window of his truck.
Yo, what are you doing?
His girlfriend viciously attacked. Then when he crashed,
Bro, back up,
he was forced out of his truck and to the ground.
Shut the fuck down. Shut the fuck down.
Surrounded
You trying to get us?
Shut the fuck up. I'm fucking talking. You want to try to hurt nobody, nigga?
and shown what their slogan, by any means necessary, means.
Fuck is he talking about, nigga?
Unless we take action, what is happening in Portland today will soon be happening in cities across the country. Daily violent protests and riots led by Antifa. Unfortunately, too many in the media have chosen to ignore or downplay this extremism masquerading as racial justice.
Journalist Andy Ngo took his life into his hands when he testified before Congress in August about Antifa, the second time in just over a month. Lawmakers turned to him because he's been covering this secretive movement for years. In turn, Antifa has tried to discredit him,
falsely branding me as a white supremacist. I happen to be gay and the son of Vietnamese refugees, so that was surprising.
and terrify him into silence, the attacks escalating in the hours leading up to his testimony.
The American public knows little about this violent insurrectionary group and its radical ideology. In Portland, the violence has been organized and led by the local chapter of the Youth Liberation Front, a shadowy Antifa organization with secret membership. The Youth Liberation Front has cells across the U.S. organized on social media sites like Twitter. They openly advocate for violent uprisings in Portland and elsewhere. To give one example, on July 25th, they called for national calls to action. Their followers obliged. We witnessed weekend street violence in Seattle, Oakland, Austin, Atlanta, Richmond, among other cities. There were multiple shootings, dozens of officer injuries, and even a homicide. I have worked undercover for months in Portland and other cities, and I've seen with my own eyes how hundreds of so-called protesters work together. Both violent and non-violent participants play a role. For example, Antifa, by their own admission, depend on mass numbers of peaceful protesters to act as human shields.
No told us he found evidence of that in Seattle, where we encountered Antifa's tactics firsthand at this protest there in January. A few months later, when the autonomous zone known as Chaz or CHOP took over part of the city center, No said he went in undercover, slipping past the armed militants guarding it to report from the inside.
What do we want? Justice!
That's where he said he got his hands on these anarchist manuals that were being passed around, and found instructions for using protesters as shields and cover. We found more manuals and instruction online at the anarchist think tank Crime Think, the Rebel Alliance, as they call it, as much a guide to Marxist history as a how-to for the resistance. The Anarchist Library takes you deeper into ideology and operational detail, with papers like this one on tactics and organization of the Black Bloc. They're the people you see all in black at the riots, who are dressing for anonymity. The matching clothing a tactic, this paper says, will make them harder to identify to police. That's also why masks were mandatory for Antifa long before the pandemic forced them on everyone else. As noted in the Mask On Zone, a guide to avoiding surveillance in the current protests, a mask will protect you from COVID and facial recognition. So will the umbrellas you see used by the crowds. They act as shields and double as a weapon for some. Chicago police released this video, which they said showed a group in black handing out projectiles, then hurling them at police from behind their umbrellas. This was supposed to have been a peaceful protest for Black Lives Matter. While they say their network is decentralized, Andy No said the tactics he's seen are uniform and the messaging the same.
Those privy to the organizational workings are divided into units, one to monitor police movement, one for street medics, one for vandals and arsonists, and so on. Antifa has mastered the art of making its violence appear innocuous. For example, projectiles that look like water balloons can be filled with chemicals. Small slingshots can be used to project rocks, glass, and ball bearings into police lines. Umbrella tips can be fastened with discreet pocket knives. Powerful handheld lasers can cause serious damage to the eyes.
Some federal agents in Portland were blinded for days, according to the Department of Homeland Security, who said out of 277 injuries, close to half were to the eye. Nationwide, more than 700 law enforcement officers were injured. When Antifa turned on Andy No at a protest in Portland last year, he was lucky to survive.
I just got beat up by the crowd, no police at all.
He was hospitalized with bleeding to his brain, but the attack failed to stop him. Noah's continued reporting on Antifa amidst the arson and assaults in Portland, as the Black Bloc has taken over the streets of his hometown. And he's still facing death threats, like this one left for him on a shattered city block. Yet many in the national media reported Antifa was a far-right fantasy. Democrat leaders like Congressman Jerry Nadler doubled down on the lie.
There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa that's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth.
Obviously, he hadn't been tuning in to any of the anarchist podcasts covering the protests or zones of rebellion, as they call them. Like Channel Zero Network, The Final Straw, It's Going Down, or this one from Crime Think, which offered insight from those on the ground. And according to one of their hosts,
we appear to have landed in what's probably the most expansive and explosive moment in rebellion against the ruling order that I've experienced in my not insubstantial career as a professional anarchist and outside agitator.
He and another host talked to an anarchist who was there when the Minneapolis City Council voted to abolish their police force and celebrated how abolitionist organizers, rioters, artists, and others joined forces to make abolition imaginable. But the highlight, part one of their series on the uprising in Minneapolis, explained the strategy and tactics behind the outrage.
This is anarchy. This is anarchy.
Our purpose here is to preserve the strategy that proved victorious against the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct.
They started with the roles people played.
Medical support, scanner monitors, and Telegram app channel operators, peaceful protesters.
The non-violent tactics of peaceful protesters served two familiar aims and one unusual one. They created a spectacle of legitimacy, which was intensified as police violence escalated. They created a front line that blocked police attempts to advance when they deployed outside of the precinct. In addition, in an unexpected turn of affairs, the peaceful protesters shielded those who employed projectiles. Whenever the police threatened tear gas or rubber bullets, non-violent protesters lined up at the front with their hands up in the air, chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot."
Add ballistic squads, barricaders, laser pointers, sound systems to rev up the crowd, and looters. What the media denied, they admitted how they orchestrated the chaos you see on TV.
The fall of the 3rd Precinct demonstrates the power of ungovernability as a strategic aim and means of crowd activity. The more that a crowd can do, the harder it will be to police. Nonviolence practitioners can use their legitimacy to temporarily conceal or shield ballistic squads. Ballistic squads can draw police fire away from those practicing nonviolence. Looters can help feed and heal the crowd while simultaneously disorienting the police. In turn, those going head-to-head with the police can open opportunities for looting. Light mages can provide ballistics crews with temporary opacity by blinding the police and disabling surveillance drones and cameras. Nonviolence practitioners can buy time for barricaders, whose works can later alleviate the need for nonviolence to secure the front line.
But if the rebellion began in Minneapolis, Portland sustained it with more than 90 days straight of violent protests. The city's progressive leaders did little to stop Antifa, who Andino and others see as the militant army of the left, pushing their anti-Trump agenda as fiercely as their anarchist policies. The violence covered by No and others on social media was mostly ignored by the national press for weeks, until federal agents were brought in to protect the courthouse. And suddenly, they were to blame for something that started long before they arrived. We obtained this incident report written by federal agents, which details some of what they were up against at the time. It said extremists used two-way radios to coordinate the violence and attacks on law enforcement. They called for escalation forces like a well-trained army and used a disciplined command and control structure. One check-in involved at least 7 people. Another call requested permission to switch communication to hand signs only, suggesting they may have been aware they were being monitored. When law enforcement were allowed to act, they cleared out a park they told us they'd dubbed the anarchist logistics base. found Molotov cocktails, magazines for semi-automatic rifles, along with gasoline, hockey sticks, shields, and so on.
It's a crew of white boys.
From the beginning, savvy protesters figured out some of this on their own, like this veteran at a protest in Dallas.
This is the setup.
They put them there on purpose,
Y'all know where we at.
They gonna set them on right up on the round.
Y'all know what building this is right here.
Now.
I ain't even gonna say what name it is.
Hey, where do them bricks go to? Where do them bricks go to? Where do them bricks
We gotta do better.
Ain't no damn construction.
Gotta do better.
Ain't no damn construction around here.
I see.
Ain't no damn construction around here. You just gonna set a pallet of bricks right there. Oh, okay.
Listen, I did jury duty 3 months ago. Y'all don't keep no bricks right there.
And a concerned citizen, Jordan St. Pierre, who was there in LA when police cars were burning as the first protests turned violent. But he told us they didn't come to riot, and the march was ending peacefully with no police anywhere near them until someone suddenly directed the crowd to this police car. It seemed odd to him, so he started recording and analyzed the video when he got home.
Yesterday I was at the protest in Los Angeles and I saw the cop car that got lit on fire, and I just broke down the video and I want to show you guys how I know that it was staged and that those people were not a part of the protest. Alright, this is a very important screenshot of the video right here. We see 3 of the characters involved. The woman in the purple backpack, the lady in the yellow hat, and the guy that's fully wrapped that lit the car on fire. I replayed this clip over because in the background you can hear somebody saying, "Why is it all white guys though?" This is a very important screenshot here because it looks as though the lady in the yellow is talking to the man that lit it on fire. Throughout the whole video, it doesn't look as though they are operating as a team. However, if you look really closely, you can see them communicating with each other because they go systematically in order. And here you can see the other person that lit the car on fire, for some reason, leaving into the crowd. Alright, if you look closely in the bottom left, you can see the same woman that was spray painting earlier. You can see her backpack on her back and the top of her head, and you see a bottle in the air. She's throwing the bottle. She's the first one to start setting it off. So after slowly trying to get people to join in and partake, it doesn't work. So what do? Step 2, take it to the next level.
I think it doesn't make sense.
So immediately whenever the car starts getting smashed, we got my boy that's never skated a day in his life running in to smash the windows, which they need to smash so that they can spray the lighter fluid or gasoline inside the car. And this right here is what I mean when I say they're a team. The 2 skateboarders at the same time come from different sides and they're swinging their skateboards at the exact same time. And immediately once the glass gets shattered, we have the woman throwing the water bottle into the car, which is lighter fluid, and then we have the man that lit the car on fire returning back to the scene to light the car on fire. Alright, and if you look closely, you can see everybody that is really involved in this. You can barely see their eyes. We have the guy lighting the car on fire, you can't see his eyes. We have the other guy in the corner of the screen, you can't see his eyes, he's throwing a rock. These guys are for sure together. Returns, the woman that started it all. She was the first woman to spray paint the car, throw something at the car, then she comes back with lighter fluid to help them get it on fire. And after successfully getting the car lit on fire, he runs away. As fast as it started, they all get out of there.
That car does not make any sense. This cop car is not a new cop car. This cop car was just here. This cop car was not a new cop car. This is an old cop car. They just lit on fire. It was just sitting in the middle of the street.
Keep in mind, that whole thing happened within 1 minute. So you can't tell me those guys aren't a team. You have to practice that. You have to have some sort of training and a plan to do something like that quick, that effective, and that smooth.
agitators, and you can see them in every event.
Jason Jones has been a Texas lawman all his life and specialized in intelligence and counterterrorism at DPS, the Department of Public Safety.
There is no doubt that these groups push in agitators who bring in helmets, gas masks. They use encrypted apps, and they are pushing a message. When they find the ability to agitate and cause a problem, they're doing that. At the same time, they're taking away from a legitimate, peaceful protest where people are trying to accomplish a legitimate goal. And you are seeing that unfold in every city across the country. That's not just me saying that. I mean, there's plenty of videos showing that.
What is a professional agitator?
When you're walking in these large protests, you already feel the energy because people are very emotional, right? They're trying to accomplish a goal. Well, I just witnessed it. I was in New York just a few weeks ago, and I was in the middle of a protest with about 3,000 people. It was very large. And it was very peaceful. People were walking along, and one individual comes running up. He's got a face shield on, and he was wearing a hood. He comes up, and there's a New York City police officer sitting in his car in the middle of an intersection, which they have now blocked. Guy runs up and he throws a large balloon full of paint. It goes all over this officer's car. But what happened immediately is he took off running, and you lost him in the crowd. Following that, though, people surged around that officer, and you could feel the energy in the crowd change immediately because that was the agitation. That was all it took. And now he's escaped, and legitimate people who are already very emotional, trying to accomplish a goal, look who's there to take the blame when this individual is gone. That's all a part of what they've learned.
So this is where it happened?
This is it. Camera was over in this area, and then looking back towards the front door.
The governor's mansion is part of Texas history, home to every governor here since 1856. But around 2 a.m. on a hot summer's night in June 2008, it went up in flames.
And the suspect came along this front area, jumped over that fence there, which was a little back, if I remember correctly, and jumped right over, ran up the sidewalk you see here, and then threw the Molotov cocktail, hitting right up into the front porch area.
What did they find the Molotov cocktail was made of?
What I can tell you that was interesting from it is that the same tradecraft in that device was also seen in other devices that were seized at another point from groups that had been here in Austin and that went to St. Paul.
St. Paul, Minnesota was the site of the Republican National Convention that year, just 3 months after the mansion fire. And Jones said no one expected the investigation to take them there. He was supporting the Texas Rangers, who had the lead. Surveillance footage captured a man tossing a Molotov cocktail, then running away. They never identified him, but 4 days earlier, this footage showed 4 men pulling up and snapping a photo, or as investigators believed, doing recon for the attack. They traced the men to a local anarchist group, but they denied being involved. Then 2 of them got arrested in Minneapolis, caught with Molotov cocktails they'd made to attack police cars during the Republican convention. They also had 35 improvised riot shields made from stolen traffic barrels, gas masks, slingshots, and helmets.
They were a small cell of individuals who were on the fringe of the extremist part of it.
So who are these groups?
Back then, you had the Affinity Group. Then later they evolved and called themselves the Democratic Socialists of Austin, also known as DSA. They evolved years later into a group known as the Red Guard. And here recently they've taken on the name Michael Ramos Brigade. And then recently, I'm hearing that they're in the process of changing now. But that's pretty standard amongst groups. They keep evolving and changing their names, and for good reason. It all is a part of trying to limit the criminal investigations. I believe Antifa, the term today is an ideology, but there are cells that have clear names and guidance and training.
What it is a network of auxiliary groups that are all organized around the exact same ideology. They can always have variations, but at their core, they're fighting for the same thing.
That's exactly right. You hit it right on the head with the word network. What we're fighting here are dark networks. And whether you call it a hub, a spoke, a wheel, or a mesh network, which is really what this kind of group or groups have become, their strengths, their ties, their connections are loosely affiliated. In some areas, they're strongly affiliated.
Before the fire, Jones said they had no idea there were so many networks of far-left radicals operating in Austin. It's not a crime to be a member. That's why he said you won't find Antifa or other names mentioned in the charge sheets of those arrested in recent riots, and why Antifa are so concerned about masking who they are, training their followers never to discuss ideology with police, and to scrub their social media, phones, and metadata from their photographs. And why they're militant about being filmed, as a Democrat leader in Wisconsin, Senator Tim Carpenter, found out when he was attacked. These two women charged with assaulting him. An anarchist group issued these rules for journalists covering the protests, directing them to train cameras on police, not comrades, and to film only their legs and backs. Jones said one place they learn these tactics is right here in Austin, at the Monkey Wrench bookstore, which they discovered back in 2008 when they were investigating the mansion fire.
It was very clear that cells had been training here. Different groups with this same anti-fascist ideology had been receiving training, and that this was what we call a hub. When I'm sitting here in front of a place that 12 years after the mansion fire and where we discovered this sort of thing occurring, and it is still happening to this day. And so if you wonder if there's an organizational structure behind it, where that funds it, that feeds the machine, that re-inspires young people, you are at the incubator right now. This is it for Austin, Texas, and it has been for a very long time. And I get very frustrated when I hear, no, this isn't occurring, no, this isn't happening, when law enforcement at every level across this country know about these places in every city.
Without further ado, Scott Crow.
At the Monkey Wrench, you can hear the stories of anarchists like Scott Crow, who spoke here in 2012. In their world, a heroic figure. To the FBI, a far-left extremist known for inciting trouble.
I've been tear gassed, I've been concussion grenades. I was almost killed by the police 3 times in New Orleans. When I say that not hyperbolically, very seriously, I thought I was gonna die, but I was willing to do it. And what I started to realize is that what's the worst thing they can do? They can kill me, or they can put me in prison, my 2 biggest fears. And once I let go of those things, they had no power over me. Because those tools are the tools that they use, fear. Because they'll stop us short from really doing the things that we want to do. And so for all of this work over the decades, I got labeled this, the domestic terrorist.
The bookstore is just 10 minutes from the gates of the UT campus in Austin. Familiar territory for Jones, who spent months doing surveillance here. He said he's never forgotten the steady stream of students and professors that came through these doors.
We linked professors coming here and helping to teach some of this anarchism and this ideology of hate and things against our society. And I was really stunned by that because, I used to sit over here and just watch this place for hours. I looked a lot different. I was a lot younger and I had a lot longer goatee and earrings. And I'll tell you, I used to wonder to myself, if you're a parent and you're trying to put your child through college, at an expensive university, and if they knew that their children come someplace like this to learn anarchist propaganda and to learn how to defecate in buckets and urinate in buckets so that you could take that and throw it on police officers. How ashamed would those parents be,
How do they do that? I mean, what's involved?
It's been a long time, but what they used to do is take a bucket and then you would take saran wrap, clear saran, and you would span it across, but with a dip. Urinate, defecate in it, cover it up, bind it, special knots, and then haul it in sealed buckets to pre-designated locations where you can then use it later on officers. Now, that was being trained here.
The digital hub of these radical bookstores is the Slingshot Collective. On their site, you can find out where to go. It keeps a running radical contact list of every training site in the country, and they're in almost every state and around the globe. To Jones, that's evidence the scale and sophistication of the far left has grown exponentially with time and technology.
And that's why we have the problem we have today, and that's why we see the level of craft, level of deployment, and level of operational capability in our cities across the country. They've been training this propaganda and this craft that I'm talking about, and that we're seeing with our cities burning for a very long time. And when they operationalized it, look at what we've seen from city after city burning. It's just, it's sad. Look, that's not just me saying that. You can go online and look at all of their postings and followers and the messaging they're sending out, even as recent as some of the rioting that was occurring here in Austin, directly involved agitating these events. So if you think that these hubs don't matter, if you think these organizational structures have no teeth, it's not correct.
Politicians on the left still claiming Antifa does no harm. It's no surprise Antifa's first mass killer is left out of the narrative and the statistics.
Multiple shots fired. Shut the whole street down.
Last year, on a Sunday night in Dayton, Ohio, self-declared leftist Connor Betts shot dead 9 unarmed people, including his own sister. His last moments captured in this surveillance video as he came around the corner searching for more victims.
We think there's one shooter. He is down.
Instead, meeting a hail of police bullets. Betts' social media revealed he was a devout supporter of socialism and Antifa. He echoed their slogans like "kill every fascist," hated Trump, and condemned the police. 6 of his victims were black. Yet leaders on the left, like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, quick to condemn a mass shooting the day before in El Paso, were silent on this. With explosions, tear gas, and leaf blowers, the armed rebellion on the streets has drawn the most fire and attention. But Antifa has also been waging a much quieter, some would say deadlier, political revolution with the help of the Democratic Socialists of America, and established substantive political power in cities like New York and Chicago, where the DSA won local council elections. Last year, the two drew closer than ever when the DSA voted to institutionalize the fight against fascism, formally aligning itself with Antifa in a decision as calculated as it was controversial.
I am proud to be endorsed by organizations like Democratic Socialists of America.
The DSA has helped elect radical political figures like AOC, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib.
I love the movement of DSA and what we all stand for.
Who all cheered on Antifa's agitators on social media.
Hey! Oh! These racist cops has got to go!
And Keith Ellison, the Minnesota Attorney General in charge of the George Floyd case, last year tweeted out this photo of himself with the Antifa handbook. The caption said it should strike fear in the heart of Donald Trump. His son, Jeremiah Ellison, a Minneapolis city councilman, defended the anarchists as Minneapolis burned, tweeting out, "I hereby declare officially my support for Antifa." Then he voted to abolish the Minneapolis police force.
This council is going to dismantle this police department.
A profound and unprecedented victory for Antifa that echoed in the defunding of police departments from New York to LA.
Antifa's goal is not only to abolish the criminal justice system, it is to bring down the republic itself.
Everybody get garbage! Let's tell the cops they were garbage! Burn it!
Burn it down, they say. But don't take my word for it. Go read their literature, listen to their chants, and look at their graffiti messages.
With anarchists bolder than ever, Andy No fears the stage may be set to challenge the election results in November with more violence.